Hey there guys, how's it going? My name's The Reaper, and in today's video I want to talk a little bit about the failure of Lawbreakers. Now I think it's pretty fair to say Lawbreakers has really failed at this point. As much as I like the game, the sales numbers are pretty well known. If you've heard of Lawbreakers or you're following it or you took an interest, chances are you've heard about how it kind of crashed and burned. Really low sales numbers and really low concurrent player numbers. I just thought it might be an interesting point of discussion. I like a bit of debate and discussion on this channel and a bit of talk about the video games industry as a whole. So I thought it might be interesting to look at a few of the different reasons why Lawbreakers failed the way it did. Okay, so the first reason I want to talk about is almost the elephant in the room. It's so obvious, it's kind of the first thing I need to talk about. I can't really talk about it later on, which is the Overwatch comparisons. Now, pretty much everywhere you looked when you were researching Lawbreakers, either in forums, videos, trailers, etc., you were always going to see the Overwatch comparisons being made. Now, there is a fair and understandable comparison. They are both hero-based, multiplayer, team-based, objective-based shooters. They do bear a lot of similarities, and crucially they take up the same kind of market share of the players who are going to play those sorts of games. Now Lawbreakers did try and differentiate itself. It's got a different aesthetic, and it tried to kind of market itself as a slightly different game. It's a faster paced combat system, it's got the zero gravity mechanics, so mechanically when you actually play it, it does feel different and it does look different aesthetically, but it wasn't quite enough to differentiate where people weren't going to make those constant comparisons. So when people were looking at the games and everyone was sort of saying, oh, it's similar to Overwatch, which is true, however, I would argue it's got enough differentiation that you consider it a different type of game, it's a different pace of game. It was still occupying the same market. We already saw Battleborn a couple of months ago fail, essentially because it was going up directly against Overwatch. Everyone played Overwatch, it was considered a better game. Battleborn wasn't critically panned, it wasn't considered a terrible game, but it couldn't get the people playing it. It wasn't considered a good enough game, it ended up going free to play, I believe. Don't quote me on that, I believe that's the correct thing. However, due to the fact it's the same market share, Lawbreakers was going essentially up against Overwatch, whether or not it wanted to, couldn't differentiate itself enough from it. Everyone kept making those comparisons, and then the people who were interested in that market were generally almost always playing Overwatch, and they didn't want to drop 25 quid taking a chance on a new game that was so similar to one they'd already fallen in love with. So essentially, those comparisons meant people were not willing to spend money for a new game. If it was free to play, as originally I believe it was going to be, it might have had a bit more chance. People give it kind of a chance for more people to get into it. They can try it for free. If they play Overwatch, I can try a free game for similar, see if it's any good, see if it's different. But unfortunately, people were not willing to spend and sort of take the risk on a game that they considered similar to one they already had and was already the market leader. I imagine as well, due to the Battleborn thing, there was also the issue of, I imagine a lot of people assumed it was going to fail. It's a risk buying a game like that, and unfortunately, for a lot of people, the risk didn't pay off. Okay, so the second thing I want to talk about is the lack of marketing and hype surrounding Lawbreakers when it was first released. So a lot of video games make the mistake of hyping themselves up loads and loads and loads, and then failing at the end because of performance issues or for mis-selling the game, or just being disappointing after everyone was expecting so much. It seems Lawbreakers actually did the opposite. It's actually a reasonably critical success in a way. Most critics thought the game was decent enough at what it did. It was reasonably well regarded. However, the issue they had is just they couldn't generate any buzz for it. To begin with, people kept making, as I've said, the Overwatch comparisons, so people just thought it was a kind of a knockoff, so to speak. And the issue is they just didn't have enough marketing, they didn't have enough sort of generating hype for the game just to get people interested. It wasn't on anyone's radar by the time it came out. And here's a comparison, this is something Overwatch and Team Fortress 2 both did very well. So for example, Overwatch is made by Blizzard, and Blizzard links all its accounts through Battle.net. So basically everyone who had heard of or was playing World of Warcraft or Hearthstone had pretty much was going to hear of Overwatch because it was a Blizzard game and they were playing a Blizzard game. And it was also, they had some really nice cinematic trailers. Blizzard does some really good cinematic stuff. They generate a lot of hype for the game, got a bit of the backstory going, and people were expecting it to do well. And it was good enough on release, it was critically quite well received, and it was considered good enough, it delivered on most of its promises, and the hype ended up working out into some really nice sales, and they've had fairly consistent playing numbers for the game, and it's just remained fairly popular as time's gone on. Now, Team Fortress 2 did a similar thing. Team Fortress 2 had the advantage of being a sequel, so it was already a sequel to a game that was very popular, and it had been in development for some years, so people were kind of waiting for it, and have been waiting for this for some time, and everyone had been following it. It was a Source game. A lot of Source games had a lot of buzz around them at this time. It came out in 2007, and it had the advantage of coming out with the orange box. So Team Fortress 2, even if it didn't generate a massive amount of hype on its own, it was being sold with Half-Life 2 Episode 2, which people were waiting for, Episode 1, Half-Life 2, Portal critically, which is a massive commercial success, and it was pulled in with that for a decent price. So even if people weren't looking necessarily for Team Fortress 2, they picked them up all on the orange box, and then the hype grew as everyone realised how good Team Fortress 2 was. So both of those games are good examples of how marketing worked for them. Both those games turned out well enough to kind of reach the level of hype and succeed critically as well. They were considered good enough games. They met the hype. They met the expectation. They sold well. Lawbreakers couldn't generate any interest. They didn't market it well enough. They didn't do enough marketing. People just hadn't really heard of it. And it was just dwarfed by other releases. There were other AAA games that people were looking at getting at the time. Destiny 2 was announced around this time. Call of Duty World War II was coming back in. So there were just too many issues. There were too many other things. No one was really paying attention to it. And even if you were paying attention to it, you've only got so much money. There's a few big games coming out. You're going to save your money for some of the other titles that you are interested in. So it couldn't get any of that buzz to begin with to get the sales numbers that it needed. So third reason is quite an obvious one. It's the low sales numbers affecting any further subsequent sales. So for example, if not many people bought the game in the first couple of days, when people after that are looking to buy the game, maybe they've only just seen it, news starts to spread. They look at the forums, they look at reviews, they look at articles, videos, whatever. Biggest issue that pops up is there's no one really playing the game. Steam charts start spreading around about the low sales numbers, the really low concurrent player numbers on Steam. If it's a multiplayer game you're trying to sell and there's no one buying it, firstly, it gives the impression that it's not very good, it's not worth splashing out on, and even if you think it's worth the risk, there's not going to be enough people to play with. There's reports going around of people not even being able to find games sometimes unless they're playing at peak times. And there was also reports that even if you did, people were just recognising the same sort of people playing at the same peak times every day. If you're only playing against the same 10, 20 people every time you play, it's not really going to be that interesting. Low sales affect further sales. Okay, so reason number 4 is going to be the lack of backstory for the characters. So someone basically described online as one of the Lawbreakers' problems is it's a hero shooter where no one cares about the heroes. They didn't make enough effort to develop the backstory in the world. They didn't sort of develop the characters, give them enough sort of time to explain what the characters' sort of motivations and personalities are, and they didn't give anyone a reason to actually care about why these two teams are fighting. So this is something that kind of Overwatch did a bit as well. This was Overwatch with the cinematics, gave a bit of the backstory to the characters, why they're fighting, and just sort of showed off their personalities a bit more in the trailers, so you had a bit more of an understanding of what was going on and what each character is kind of like in the various cinematics they made. Blizzard does a very good job of cinematics, I will credit them that. However, I see where people are coming from with this, but this is one of the reasons I don't think it holds up as well under somewhat scrutiny. For example, this is why I've made the comparison to Team Fortress 2. When Team Fortress 2 came out, no one cared why the two teams were fighting. It didn't need a backstory. It's got a very, even 10 years later, it's just got a very basic backstory. You had two teams of red and blue. They were acronyms for basic construction companies. That's how kind of some of the maps were set out. But it's essentially a red team and a blue team. They're the same class on either team. There's different personalities for each of the classes. So they did a bit of, with the meet the, say, soldier, meet the engineer. They gave a bit of an idea of what the characters' personalities are like, and that shows throughout the game as well. The different quips they give and sort of their mannerisms in the game. You get a bit of an understanding what the characters in Team Fortress 2 are like. But there was no real backstory, there was no real reason given for why they're fighting, and no one cared. Because you didn't really need one. It was just an online shooter. You got this red team fighting a blue team. These are the classes. There's a decent amount of variation in the classes. Had quite a unique art style, Team Fortress 2. But yeah, no real backstory for the characters. And also the characters are the same on each team, which is the same for Overwatch, which is the one thing that Lawbreakers does have in its advantage. It's the classes are the same on each team. In Team Fortress 2, the classes are just named after what they are, and they're the same on either team. They're just literally different colours. They look exactly the same on either team. On Overwatch, you've got different named characters who perform different roles. However, they're the same on either team. I've looked this up. But with Lawbreakers, you've actually got the same classes, but you've got different character models, different voiceover work. The characters actually feel different based on what team you're playing on, and they actually feel like the Law team. You've got Law and Breakers, hence the name. So Team Law, the sort of the characters are far more, generally sort of more serious. Some of them are still quite lackadaisical or kind of like jokey around when they're doing it, but they're clearly the good guys, and the mannerisms of Breakers are a lot more sort of serious or just evil business like, or just sort of like maverick types. You actually get a bit of a feel for the different personalities of the characters based on what team you're playing. Even if you didn't know what team you're on before you join the game, it'd become obvious, very, very apparent very quickly what team you're on just through what characters you're playing. So it actually makes it feel when you're playing, the characters are actually a bit more unique. They have unique personalities based on what side you're on in the game. So that's actually one advantage Lawbreakers has over the other two games. So I don't think the characters having a massive backstory really negatively affected it, because as I said with Team Fortress 2, didn't hamper it. And the characters are actually different in each team, so I think this has actually worked out slightly better for Lawbreakers. So the next reason I want to talk about is the difficulty of entry to play this type of game. So basically, when the game, or just before the game first came out, there were a couple of open beta weekends so people could try the game out. And normally this would make perfect sense. Get to try the game out so people will have a bit of an idea of what the game is actually like and if they want to buy it. So the problem here was people have argued, and I think there's some merit to this, that an open beta weekend wasn't long enough for people to get over the initial hump of the difficulty of the game. Lawbreakers is a very fast-paced game, and if you weren't expecting that, and even then it takes some time getting used to it, it is a little bit frustrating initially. However, once you get over that, once you get used to that, and if you're decent at the game, you're then fine. However, the initial part of the game is a bit frustrating. It might get some time to get used to it, and people felt an open beta weekend, it just wasn't quite long enough for people to sort of get over that initial hump. So people sort of went, oh, I'm only playing open beta weekend, I haven't got anything to pay it, I'll give it a go, and played sort of a bit when, you know, I'm just getting destroyed, this is too frustrating, can't be bothered. If they'd bought it, or if it was free to play, maybe they're going, you know what, I'll just keep going, I'll keep giving it a chance. I've either paid for it or it's free, I'll stick with it a bit, and then eventually as you get used to it, you then pick it up and you think, okay, I'm over the initial sort of learning curve, I'm fine now. This wasn't helped by the fact the game doesn't have any proper tutorials. There are a couple of video guides, there's kind of some YouTube videos embedded into the game itself you can watch on the different classes and their mechanics, which is good, but it's not the same as having a proper playing tutorial where you can actually play a simulated game against bots or just a thing against low skilled players. When you join a game, people bought the game or tried the open beta weekend, got thrown straight in the deep end, and they got sick of being crushed by the more dedicated high skilled players as they're trying to just learn the basic mechanics of the game, and people got frustrated at them because they weren't pulling the weight on the team. And then people just got turned off by the game, so they didn't have enough time and there wasn't enough effort put in to help people get over that initial hump. Open beta weekend didn't help. If it was free to play, it might have been a bit better, but unfortunately the lack of tutorials and the difficulty ceiling in the game turned too many people off too quickly. They tried it on the open beta weekend, and then just as the game released they went, you know what, I got frustrated with it, I'm not dropping 25 quid to hope to get used to it. So that was kind of one of the barriers for the game. So that's just analysis of a few of the reasons and kind of my own opinions on just why the game isn't doing very well, and now the game is just sat in a very difficult position. So I talked a bit about why the game failed. Those reasons also mean it's in a very difficult position to get out of. So everyone who is going to be looking up the game, any potential new players, are just going to be stumbling across all the information. Lawbreakers is treated almost more as an industry phenomenon about how the game failed. It's more of an interesting research topic to most people rather than analysing the game itself. It's more an analysis of why it failed. Any new player or any new person who you see it crops up on the Steam store or sees a free-to-play weekend or sees it on a sale, looks it up, it's just going to find out, if they haven't heard about it already, essentially why the game has failed. It's a very difficult position for them to dig themselves out from, and that's kind of exacerbated by the fact that everyone knows about the fact that it's very difficult to find games. There's not enough players but even playing the game just to be able to find a game in a reasonable time. A lot of the time that's what people are reporting, and that's not going to lend itself to new players. You have to spend 10 minutes just finding a game, and then when you get in the game there's no real tutorials. You're going to get stomped by all those players who have stuck with the game. After you finally find one, you're a new player, you get thrown in a game, you don't really know how the classes or the mechanics work, there's no real detailed tutorials on that. There are a few tutorial videos, as I've said, but they don't really give enough depth, and they're not going to get over that frustrating bit, especially if they're getting stomped by all the more experienced players as a new player. So it's not a game type, due to the fact they've gone for a high skill ceiling, it's not a game type that is going to endear itself to new players unless they seriously up their tutorial game and lower that barrier for entry. However, lowering that barrier for entry, if they change some of the mechanics to make the game a bit easier and slower, that's going to turn off the people that have bought the game. So they're in a very difficult position to try and dig themselves out of the hole they unfortunately have found themselves in, and to kind of recover their reputation. And the other last issue is, do they or do they not go free to play? However, free to play might seem a reasonable option that will allow a lot more people to come in and try the game, just not on a free weekend, so they get a lot of time, as much time as they want essentially. They've already got loot crates in the game. They can just have that for cosmetic stuff. The game isn't selling as it is, so they can go free to play as an option to get more people in, and maybe if they get enough people going in, the reputation of the game will increase and people will start to see the merits of the game, and maybe they can sell the loot crates or maybe some extra DLCs, maybe cosmetic DLCs or some extra stuff as maps, and they can get a bit of money that way. The problem is everyone has the reputation of, everyone's kind of talked about, do they go free to play now? Considering the reputation they have, the issue with going to free to play is it makes some sense. However, it's kind of an admittance of the game is failing. When someone says, oh, it's gone, like an MMO especially, it's very common, it's gone free to play. People associate it's gone free to play as it's struggling, it's not selling, they have to go free to play, as kind of a last resort to save it. So it could work out going free to play. However, they've still got the other issues with the game, and if it goes free to play, that's going to confirm the kind of suspicion and reputation the game already has about it's basically failed, and that's just a final admittance, and it's going to be perceived as kind of the final last Hail Mary pass of can we save this game. So I talked about a few of the reasons. Anything I haven't maybe talked about or you want me to elaborate on, please leave it below in the comments. Any other reasons you think you want to give, think maybe I can weigh in on, do that, leave those below as well, like a bit of discussion maybe down in the comments. Other than that, if you like the video, thank you, please leave a like or subscribe if you enjoyed yourself. Otherwise, thank you very much indeed for watching. I'm the Reaper, and I will see you next time. Thank you.